You remember Love Will Keep Us Together and Rhinestone Cowboy. But what about the song that knocked Elton John out of the #1 spot for 3 straight weeks and then completely vanished from radio? 1975 was an absolute goldmine of one-hit wonders, and I'm talking about songs that dominated the airwaves for a few glorious months before their artists seemingly disappeared into thin air. Some of these tracks were legitimately brilliant, others were gloriously weird, but all of them deserve another listen because they capture something special about mid-70s radio that we'll never get back. Number 10, Emma by Hot Chocolate. Let's start with a band that technically had more than one hit, but in America, they're basically remembered for one song, and it's probably not this one. Hot Chocolate was a British soul group led by Errol Brown, and in 1975, they released Emma, a heartbreaking ballad that tells one of the most devastating stories in 70s pop music. The song is about a girl named Emmeline, who dreamed of becoming a movie star from the time she was 5 years old. The narrator has loved her since childhood, and they get married at 17. But Emma's acting career never takes off. She keeps going to auditions, searching for that one play or role that never comes her way. The depression builds until one cold December night. The narrator finds her dead in their bedroom with a suicide note that reads, "Darling, I love you, but I just can't keep on living on dreams no more." Brown wrote the song as a tribute to his mother, who died when she was only 38 years old, and Brown was 19. In a 2009 interview with the Mail on Sunday, he explained that the emotional scream near the end of the song wasn't theatrical at all. It was raw grief coming through. Producer Mickey Most actually didn't want to release Emma because he thought it was too slow and too morbid for radio, but secretaries at Rack Records changed his mind. The song peaked at number 8 on the Billboard Hot 100 in July of 1975, which is remarkable for what amounts to a 5-minute tragedy. The production features lush string arrangements that build throughout the track, and Brown's vocal performance captures both tenderness and anguish. What's interesting is that Hot Chocolate would eventually have a much bigger American hit with You Sexy Thing later in 1975 and into 1976, but Emma was actually their first real breakthrough in the States. The problem was that American radio didn't quite know what to do with Hot Chocolate. Were they a soul act? A pop group? They fell into this weird category that made consistent airplay difficult. In the UK, they were massive throughout the 70s and into the 80s, scoring hit after hit. But stateside, they never quite found their footing beyond those 2 songs. Emma remains one of the most emotionally powerful pop songs of 1975. And if you haven't heard it in a while, or ever, it's worth seeking out. Just be prepared for how devastating it is. Number 9, Run, Joey Run by David Geddes. Okay, this one is wonderfully, spectacularly ridiculous. And I mean that in the most affectionate way possible. David Geddes was a session singer and songwriter who recorded Run, Joey Run in late 1974, and it climbed to number 4 on the Billboard Hot 100 in early 1975. The song is basically a mini rock opera about a teenage girl named Julie, who's pregnant, and her father is so enraged that he literally shoots and kills her boyfriend Joey, while Julie throws herself in front of the bullet. Yes, really. This was a top 5 hit. The song is performed from multiple perspectives,
just the blind man
with Geddes doing different voices for Julie,
the local
Joey,
hometown
and
fans.
Julie's father. It's melodramatic in a way that only mid-70s pop could be, complete with gunshot sound effects and Julie's dying screams. According to interviews Geddes gave at the time, he never expected the song to be a hit. He thought it was too dark, too theatrical, too weird. But something about it connected with audiences. Probably the same audiences who were eating up story songs like Billy Don't Be a Hero and The Night Chicago Died. Geddes tried to follow it up with another tragic story song called The Last Game of the Season, about a high school football player who gets paralyzed, but it only made it to number 27. After that, radio pretty much forgot about him. He continued working in music as a writer and producer, but Run Joey Run remains his only moment in the spotlight. If you haven't heard it, prepare yourself. It's an experience. Number 8, Wildfire by Michael Martin Murphey. This one's a genuine folk rock gem that deserves way more recognition than it gets. Michael Martin Murphey was a Texas singer-songwriter who'd been kicking around the country rock scene for years before Wildfire took off in early 1975. The song peaked at number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100 and stayed on the charts for months. Wildfire tells the story of a girl who disappears while searching for her lost pony during a blizzard on the Great Divide. It's a ghost story, essentially, with this haunting refrain about the girl and her horse still being out there somewhere running through the night. Murphey wrote it with Larry Kanzler, and the inspiration allegedly came from a combination of Western folklore and Murphey's own experiences growing up in Texas around old cowboy stories. The production is sparse and effective. There's this galloping rhythm that mimics a horse running, and Murphey's vocal has this dusty, windswept quality that perfectly matches the lyrics. It's one of those songs that creates a complete atmosphere. You can practically feel the cold wind and see the snow when you listen to it. Murphey went on to have a successful career in country music and became known for championing Western heritage music, but he never had another pop crossover hit like Wildfire. The song has remained a staple of classic rock and adult contemporary stations, though, and it's been covered numerous times. There's something timeless about it, something that transcends the era it was recorded in. If you're into storytelling in songs, this is one of the best examples from the entire decade. Number 7, Black Water by the Doobie Brothers. Wait, the Doobie Brothers aren't a one-hit wonder, you're thinking. And you're absolutely right. But here's the thing. Black Water wasn't supposed to be a single at all. It was a deep album cut from their 1974 album, What Were Once Vices Are Now Habits, and it only became a single because some regional DJs started playing it heavily in late 1974 and early 1975. Warner Brothers Records finally released it as a single in December 1974, and it went to number 1 in March of 1975, giving the Doobies their first chart topper. But the reason I'm including it here is because for a lot of casual listeners, this is the only Doobie Brothers song they really know. They might recognize Listen to the Music or Long Train Runnin' if you play them, but Black Water is the one they can name. Patrick Simmons wrote the song as an ode to the Mississippi Delta, and it has this wonderfully loose, jammy feel to it. The a cappella breakdown in the middle, where the band sings, "I'd like to hear some funky Dixieland, Pretty Mama Come and Take Me by the Hand," became one of the most distinctive moments in any 70s rock song. They recorded it with minimal overdubs, trying to capture a live feel, and it worked beautifully. The irony is that the Doobies were in the middle of a transitional period when Black Water hit number 1. Tom Johnston was having health problems, and Michael McDonald would soon join the band and take them in a more R&B influenced direction. Black Water represents the last gasp of the original Doobie Brothers sound, and it went out on top. For a lot of people, it's still the definitive Doobies track, even though the band themselves might point you toward other songs. Number 6, Fly Robin Fly by Silver Convention. If you were in a disco in late 1975, you couldn't escape this song. Fly Robin Fly by Silver Convention hit number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in November, and it was everywhere. The remarkable thing about it is that the entire song consists of exactly 6 words, repeated over and over. Fly Robin, fly. Fly Robin, fly. Up, up to the sky. That's it. That's the whole thing. Silver Convention was a German disco group created by producer Michael Kunze and composer Sylvester LeVay. The group consisted of 3 singers, Penny McLean, Ramona Wolfe, and Linda G. Thompson. but their voices were essentially used as another instrument in the mix. Fly Robin. Fly is driven by its relentless rhythm track and those repeating vocals. And at over 6 minutes long in its album version, it was pure dance floor fuel. The song won a Grammy for Best R&B Instrumental Performance, which is hilarious considering it has lyrics, however minimal. It became the first song by a German act to reach #1 in America, and it sold millions of copies worldwide. The follow-up, Get Up and Boogie, made it to #2 in 1976. But after that, Silver Convention faded from American charts as disco evolved and competition increased. What makes Fly Robin Fly memorable isn't complexity or deep lyrics. It's pure distilled danceability. It's a reminder that sometimes less really is more, and that a killer groove can carry a song just as effectively as elaborate wordplay. Listening to it now, it sounds like the blueprint for countless dance tracks that would follow. It's minimalism perfected. Number 5, Dynomite by Bazuka. Here's one that's been sampled and referenced more than it's been remembered. Bazuka was essentially a studio creation by producer Tony Camillo, who'd previously worked with Gladys Knight and the Pips. Dynomite came out in 1975 and peaked at #10 on the Billboard Hot 100, riding the wave of funk and disco that was dominating the charts. The song is built around this incredibly infectious bass line and horn stabs, with the word dynamite being shouted repeatedly throughout. It was clearly inspired by Jimmy Walker's catchphrase from Good Times, which was one of the biggest sitcoms on television at the time. The whole thing feels calculated to be a party record, and it succeeded completely at that goal. What's interesting is that there was no real band called Bazuka performing this. It was Camillo in the studio with various session musicians, creating a track designed specifically to capitalize on a cultural moment. This was actually pretty common in the mid-'70s disco boom. Producers would create groups out of thin air, record 1 or 2 singles, and then move on to the next project if things didn't take off. Bazuka did release a follow-up single called Dynomite Part 2, which made it to #50, but that was the end of the story. Camillo went back to production work, and the Bazuka name disappeared. But Dynomite itself has had a surprisingly long afterlife. It's been sampled by numerous hip-hop and electronic artists, and you'll still hear it in movies and TV shows when they want to evoke that mid-'70s funk vibe. It's a perfect example of a song that was designed to be a moment rather than a career, and on those terms, it's a complete success. Number 4, Please Mr. Please by Olivia Newton-John. Olivia Newton-John was already a star by 1975, particularly in country music circles. But Please Mr. Please represents something of an anomaly in her career. It peaked at #3 on the Billboard Hot 100 in April 1975, sandwiched between her more famous hits like I Honestly Love You and Have You Never Been Mellow. The song, written by Bruce Welch and John Rostill of The Shadows, is about a woman in a bar begging the bartender not to play a particular song on the jukebox because it reminds her too much of a lost love. It's classic country pop material, and Newton-John delivers it with just the right amount of vulnerability without tipping over into melodrama. The production by John Farrar is immaculate, with pedal steel guitar and strings blending together perfectly. What makes this a one-hit wonder in the context of this list is that most people, when you mention Olivia Newton-John, immediately think of Grease and Physical and maybe Xanadu. They don't necessarily remember her mid-'70s country pop phase, even though she was huge during that period. Please Mr. Please was massive on both pop and country charts, but it's been largely forgotten in the broader cultural memory of Newton-John's career. The song represented a specific moment in country pop crossover before that genre became completely dominated by urban cowboy-style trends in the late 70s. It's smooth, it's well-crafted, and Newton-John's performance is genuinely affecting. If you're a fan of early 70s country pop, this is essential listening, but it tends to get overlooked in favor of flashier moments in her discography. Number 3. Only Yesterday by the Carpenters. The Carpenters absolutely were not a one-hit wonder, but Only Yesterday occupies this strange space in their catalog where it was a significant hit at the time and then just sort of evaporated from collective memory. It peaked at number 4 in April 1975, and it was all over AM radio that spring and summer. Richard Carpenter has said in interviews that Only Yesterday was one of his favorite productions he did with Karen. The arrangement is gorgeous, with these cascading piano runs and a string section that builds throughout the song. Lyrically, it's about looking back on a relationship that's ended, with Karen singing about how love felt only yesterday, but now seems distant and impossible to recapture. Karen's vocal performance is, as always, stunning. There's this warmth and clarity to her voice that no amount of modern production can replicate. The song showcases her ability to convey complex emotion without over-singing, letting the lyrics and melody do the heavy lifting. It's understated in all the right ways. The reason I'm including this is because when people think of the Carpenters, they think of Close to You, We've Only Just Begun, Rainy Days and Mondays, and maybe Top of the World. Only Yesterday was just as big as several of those songs, but it's rarely included in Carpenter's retrospectives or greatest hits packages that get radio play. It deserves to be mentioned in the same breath as their most famous work because musically and emotionally, it's just as accomplished. Number 2. Philadelphia Freedom by the Elton John Band. Now, before you come at me about Elton John being a one-hit wonder, hear me out. Philadelphia Freedom is unique in Elton's catalog because it was credited to the Elton John Band rather than just Elton John, and it represents a specific moment where he was experimenting with a more R&B influenced sound. The song was written as a tribute to Billie Jean King and her Philadelphia Freedom's tennis team in World Team Tennis. Elton and Bernie Taupin wrote it specifically for King, who was a close friend. It was recorded in early 1975 and hit number 1 in April, giving Elton his third number 1 single in the United States. What makes Philadelphia Freedom distinctive is its Philly soul production style. The arrangement, created by Gene Page and Elton, features this driving rhythm section, sweeping strings, and horn stabs that were clearly influenced by the Philadelphia International Records sound that was dominating R&B charts at the time. It's funkier and more rhythm-driven than most of Elton's mid-70s output. The reason it feels like a one-hit wonder is that Elton never really pursued that particular sound again. It was an experiment, a one-off that happened to become a massive hit. When you think of classic Elton John songs, you probably think of Tiny Dancer, or Rocket Man, or Benny and the Jets. Philadelphia Freedom doesn't quite fit with the rest of his catalog, even though it was huge at the time. It's a fascinating outlier from one of the most successful artists of the decade, and it shows what Elton could do when he stepped outside his usual style. Number 1. Fallin in Love by Hamilton, Joe Frank, and Reynolds. This is the perfect example of a song that was absolutely massive in 1975, and then just disappeared from cultural consciousness. Fallin in Love peaked at number 1 in July, knocking the Eagles one of these nights out of the top spot. It stayed in the top 10 for months and sold over 1 million copies. Hamilton, Joe Frank, and Reynolds were Dan Hamilton, Joe Frank Carollo, and Tommy Reynolds, and Fallin in Love was actually their comeback hit. They'd had a top 5 hit back in 1971 with Don't Pull Your Love, but that was credited to just Hamilton, Joe Frank, and Reynolds without the Oxford comma, because apparently punctuation matters in band names. By 1975, Tommy Reynolds had replaced original member Alan Dennison, and they were trying to recapture their early 70s success. Fallin in Love is pure mid-70s soft rock. It's got that smooth, easy listening quality with just enough edge to keep it from being complete background music. The lyrics are about meeting someone at a party and being caught off guard by sudden attraction, and the melody is catchy without being cloying. Dan Hamilton's lead vocal has this conversational quality that makes the whole thing feel genuine and relatable. The song was written by Hamilton, and he said that it came together quickly, almost effortlessly. Sometimes that's how the best songs happen. There's no laboring over every word or arrangement choice. It just flows naturally, and that spontaneity comes through in the recording.
Storybox Audio.
Hamilton, Joe Frank, and Reynolds tried to follow up with Winners and Losers, which made it to number 21, but that was essentially the end for them. The group broke up shortly after, and none of the members had significant solo success.
Storybox Audio.
Fallin in Love remains their legacy, a perfect capsule of what pop radio sounded like in the summer of 1975. It's not trying to be profound or groundbreaking. It's just a well-crafted pop song about a universal experience, and sometimes that's more than enough. So there you have it, 10 one-hit wonders from 1975 that deserve another listen. Some of these tracks are legitimately great songs that got lost in the shuffle of changing musical trends. Others are wonderfully strange artifacts of their time. But all of them capture something essential about what radio sounded like 50 years ago, when disco was rising, soft rock was dominating, and artists were willing to take chances on story songs about murder and ghost horses. Which of these songs did you remember? Are there any 1975 one-hit wonders I missed that you think should have made the list? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this trip back to 1975, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I've got more music history content coming your way, including a look at the bizarre story behind one of the biggest albums of 1976. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for watching.